Hello, my name is Richard Alexander Röhrl. I work as a senior economist at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to our side event on transforming education for a human-centered approach to STI and SDGs. STI is, of course, science, technology, and innovation. This event is being organized by ILO, spearheaded, I would say, by ILO, together with my department and the workstream 10 of the interagency task team on science and technology innovation for the SDGs. And as you might know, workstream 10 is the team that brings together analytical work on emerging technologies in science for the SDGs. It brings together especially lead authors of UN flagship publications. So these people who come up with policy ideas from the various UN entities. And as you can imagine, many of us have an economics background, a natural science background, a social science background. And what we know, what we learned throughout our formative years and our practical experience is very much based on models, on theories, on the academic insights that we have from the disciplines from which we come from. So it's no surprise that some of these policy insights from the UN system differ in various ways because they're based on different background, theoretical and empirical. So it was with great pleasure and excitement for all of us when Irmgard from ILO came up with the idea for a research project on looking much closer into the human-centered approach to innovation and science and technology in a broader sense. So, where do we agree? Where do we differ? What is the empirical evidence for our different approaches in supporting member states in their very well worth initiatives to try to harness science, technology, innovation for their development and above all for sustainable development? So this is the idea of this side event. We want to present you our very initial ideas and thoughts we have come up with in terms of concepts and empirical evidence. We look at 3 different case studies from Brazil, Tanzania, and Zambia to give a bit of a real life background. And we want also hopefully hear from you in the end through a Q&A. I would have a lot to say, but I don't want to keep you waiting to listen to all our great experts on the panel. Let me just quickly introduce them just by affiliation. Of course, I mentioned Irmgard Nübler already, who is a senior economist at the ILO Research Department. She has been the driving force behind this project, and many of you probably know her from the various initiatives she has been involved in. I have on the panel Dorothea Kleine. She's professor in Institute for Global Sustainable Development and a research team lead there on digital technologies, data, and innovation at the University of Sheffield in the UK. And then we have, going to the 3 case studies, we have Rita Alfonso, also a professor, but at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, at the Faculty of Business Administration. She also involved in the lab Technology and Social Development and Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability Networks, so in Brazil. So you can see that goes into the social innovation side of things with empirical evidence from the favelas there. Then we have Mrs. Tusenga Moyoya, apologies for the pronunciation. She's a co-founder of the Africana Network for Women in IT in Zambia, co-director of the Gender Just Digital Innovation in Africa project. Again, a very interesting case study that we look forward to. And then we have an intervention by Abbott Christian from the Missionary Benedictine Abbey in Nanda, Tanzania, something I was very much looking forward to. Unfortunately, he fell sick, but we will hear his statement. Irmgard will take over. So without further ado, I would have a lot of experience to tell you about my own perspective, but I want to hear from Irmgard and Dorothea. So Irmgard, the floor is yours. Tell us the ideas and what we have come up with so far.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for your nice introduction and for also referring to the work of the ILO. I'm working in the research department of the ILO, and one of my major areas of work is related to new technologies and innovation. And this, of course, leads us then to the Sustainable Development Agenda. Innovation and technology is widely acknowledged in the 2030 Agenda framework. And in almost all 17 SDGs, there's a reference made to science, technology, and innovation. And experience shows that harnessing STI for SDG is indeed a very complex process. So we observe that progress in STI and SDGs is still slow in many countries, despite government strategies to support this process. And this challenges the models and framework which we use to explain innovations in technological change. And this has motivated the work stream of the interagency technical team of the UN, which is focusing on analytical work, and it has been mentioned by Alex already. The idea was to really address this issue of and to reflect on frameworks which are underpinning the debate on STI and SDGs. We are, next slide, please. So we are currently developing a new research agenda, which is in particular focusing on the role of human beings in this process of science, technology, and innovation, and how that affects SDGs. In other words, we are focusing, or we're taking a human-centered approach to STI for harnessing SDGs. And this focus on a human-centered approach has been inspired by the recent work of the ILO, which is promoting a human-centered approach to the future of work. This has been, next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, it's okay. The ILO has, in its centenary declaration of 2019, highlighted the human-centered approach as the way to the future of work. Now, what do we mean by a human-centered approach to harness STI and SDGs? We distinguish between three distinct dimensions. First of all, we have a normative dimension. This is human well-being as the goal of, or the ultimate goal of sustainable development. Second dimension is that we look at humans as actors and agents who are driving the STI process. And this is important because we have mainstream economic models which play a very important role in explaining STI and SDGs, which more or less ignore this important role of human actors and agents in this process. And thirdly, we have a dimension which is humans as learners, which is the intrinsic element of each human being. As someone grows up, it's all about learning and learning to perform these roles and actions, which are also important in this STI process. I will briefly comment on each of these dimensions, and I would in particular like to draw your attention in that context to the need for further research. The question is, in each of these three dimensions, how we can strengthen the 2030 agenda. The findings of our research will hopefully inform policymakers and other stakeholders on how to develop comprehensive policy packages and strategies which strengthens these three human dimensions. We think that countries cannot achieve dynamic processes of transformative changes without understanding and promoting a human-centered strategy. the first dimension, it's about human well-being as the ultimate goal of sustainable development. In this sense, the 2030 Agenda framework takes a human-centered approach. It recognizes human well-being, progress in humanity, human rights, dignity and equality, human freedom, human development as the goals of sustainable development. However, there are also important debates. For example, one is a growing concern about our lack of knowledge and empirical evidence on the impact of policies on human well-being. And others are concerned with trade-offs between SDGs and the negative effects of STI on human well-being. And there are debates about the intrinsic value of, for example, biodiversity as opposed to human development. When it comes to the next slide, please. When it comes to the, we had this one, this human well-being. Now, next slide, please. Next slide. Oh yeah, thank you. The second dimension, which is about human beings as key players in innovation processes or process of technological change. We know from many models that these roles are often not modeled in economic theories, and they're often neglected in debates about innovation and technological change. And many economic theories, for example, make very strong assumptions about the nature of human beings and how humans make choices and behave. And it basically excludes or deletes the whole idea of humans as actors and agents of change in these models. So we therefore undertook to learn more and to gain a deeper understanding on, what is the literature, what we know about this role of different of humans in the innovation process. We undertook a literature review of different strands in economics, but also in philosophy, anthropology, geography, and psychology. And these studies just revealed very interesting insights. And I mean, they show that they highlight, for example, like philosophy, that only humans can create new ideas and visions of the future. And humans are the source of inspiration and ideas. And even when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's human to create new knowledge. And it is a fundamental human trait to search for knowledge, inventions, and discoveries. Humans take decisions, manage processes of change, and they use their agency. All these actions and choices influence patterns of structural change and creates paths of regional development, and has important impact on STI. So entrepreneurs and workers, researchers, policymakers, political leaders, consumers, producers, they all search for new ideas and solutions. And when you read this literature, which is so rich, then you find that these insights are largely neglected in debates about STI and accelerating progress in SDGs. And we suggest that we undertake much more research to understand these different roles and functions of humans in STI. For example, we need to know how important they are in different stages of development. What means agency and innovation capabilities in the informal economy, which has low levels of progress in SDGs. We also found that these different strands of the literature are almost completely separated, and they sometimes borrow some ideas from each other. However, they do not really collaborate. And I think what we really need to do is, if we really want to develop a human-centered framework to harness STI and to promote SDGs, then we need to develop a comprehensive human-centered framework, which also integrates these different disciplines. And finally, I would like to mention the third dimension, which is human beings as learners. And that leads us to the next presentation. Dorothea is doing exactly that, and this leads us also to the theme of this side event, which is about transforming education for a human-centered approach to STI and SDGs. I will stop there and give the floor back to Alex or Dorothea. Thank you.
Thank you, Irmgard. Right away, Dorothea, you have the floor.
Unmute myself and share my screen. So yes, thank you very much for the invitation, not just to this session, but also to collaborate together on this research agenda. My name is Dorothea Kleine. I'm from the University of Sheffield, and I'm going to be using about 8 minutes to make the case for a human-centered approach to innovation in order to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. So basically, STI is mentioned in the Agenda 2030, as Irmgard has already pointed out. And I'd also agree that so far insufficient attention is paid to the role of humans in innovation processes. Humans engage in innovation processes as creators, as everyday bricoleurs, putting different kinds of innovations and technologies together as it suits their purposes in their lives. They act as change agents, and there where they have also responsibility and power over other people's choices, for example, through business decisions and policy, they also themselves influence the relationship between innovation, technology, and our everyday. So the design, practice, and the regulation of STI is deeply intertwined with humans, with human learning, and also with human choices. And we should remember that when we talk about humans and we wholeheartedly embrace this sort of human-centered approach, we need to also acknowledge more than human dimensions. So we need to recognize that humans are part of and not in some way separate from nature. And we also need to acknowledge that, for instance, on the frontiers of our research in artificial intelligence and bioinformatics and so on, our understanding of human technology relationships is changing, it's evolving, and the boundaries are becoming ever more fluid. So we need to extend our understanding in so many ways. So, for instance, we need to not just think about innovation systems, innovation policy, innovation mechanisms, innovation finance, but also think about precisely the role of humans and how humans themselves learn. And this fits with this year's theme of education. That means also we need to extend from an instrumentalist to an intrinsic view of humans, from maybe a too econocentric focus on economically relevant innovation to consider also innovation that's socially, ecologically, and culturally relevant. And then something that can be difficult for a community of development policymakers, practitioners, and researchers in development, which is letting go of our wish to think about the world in predictable terms, letting go of predictability per se, and allowing for serendipity and innovation to happen in that way. We also need to move to new, including thinking about entrepreneurs and innovators in their diversity. That could be gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and the places that they come from. But also think about innovation itself in more collectivist and altruistic forms. And that also goes for entrepreneurialism. So a human-centered approach to SDI takes a much more holistic view of also the learner as a human being who has intrinsic dignity rather than is some kind of human capital that has to be shaped. We also know from educationalists like Montessori that the affective dimension, and this includes curiosity, creativity, and a joy in learning, needs to be fostered. And importantly, we need learners who are free from fear so that they enjoy that learning process. Human beings are really at the center of the learning process. That's what a humanist approach to education is telling us. But also we need to recognize that a human-centered approach in an era of climate crisis and biodiversity also needs to recognize human responsibility to other species and also to our environment. And then, of course, we need to think about a progressive, forward-looking, human-centered approach, which includes not just Western humanism, but also draws on the wisdom of different cultures and applies this also to innovation, as for example, Andrea Jimenez and others have argued. So we need to think about the learner, and maybe we should also think about particularly disadvantaged learners. We're used to thinking about, say, social capital as a capital of the poor, but we should also recognize social resources, information, educational resources, and that includes informal education, as well as psychological resources as capitals of the poor, resources of the poor that can be developed in non-rival form. Psychological resources then include things like the ability to envisage, imagination, curiosity, self-confidence, an entrepreneurial spirit, but also tenacity and resilience, which we know that, for instance, income poor people or disadvantaged groups often have in abundance. And there's another concept that we can learn from educationalists like Alfred Bandura, which is the idea of self-efficacy, which is effectively a belief in one's own ability to change the situation one is in through effort. And this is central to the learning process. And educationalists like Gallagher have actually shown how self-efficacy beliefs correlate very strongly with strong academic results. So there are different aspects of human-centered approaches, and one of them includes the aspect of what kind of values we want to foster. I already talked about that we need to think beyond a very self-centered model of the entrepreneur. So instilling values of cooperation, dignity, self-responsibility, civism, and social justice is quite central in this process of thinking about how we might develop innovators of the future. But also, especially in situations of injustice, education, as Paulo Freire would have argued, education is also an emancipatory process. It's not just about building skills, but it's also developing through critical dialogue, something he calls consensusação, a process of building consciousness about a situation and maybe also how collectively change that situation. Teachers are an important part of the learning process, and that includes clearly also the affective dimension in the learner and teacher relationship. Learners need to feel nourished and free to explore and also to make mistakes and innovate. Only then can we have a learning environment where people can discover. So we need to think about learning processes as part of our research agenda. A classic distinction we might be familiar with is the distinction between behaviorism, which focuses strongly on observable behavior and maybe correct responses, and constructivism, which is a different pedagogic and educational philosophy, which talks about humans constructing their own realities, as Piaget would put it. This also includes acknowledging multiple knowledges. And then Vygotsky talks about social constructivism. Knowledge is constructed through collective construction of meaning. And this again is really important if we think about something as ambitious as the SDG agenda, which is a collective negotiation at global level. Learning processes are then embedded in this logic of constructivism in particular contexts and need to be understood as such. Learning is embedded in communities of practice, And learning and problem solving is also a collective endeavor. And again, this challenges us the myth of this single one innovator, and instead also suggests that we can also innovate collectively. I'm almost at the end, but I really wanted to talk a little bit about failure. And there's a wonderful quote from Hamid Akhavan and others, lots of people have been commenting in this direction. If you don't make any mistakes, you're not being innovative enough, he says. And I think it really illustrates something important. Trial and error is a really important mechanism for learning. So how do we treat mistakes? How do we treat setbacks? How do we deal with failure? Do we see them as a natural part of the learning process, or as something that deserves ridicule, criticism, punishment? These are the things that children and then later adults learn very early on in their school environment and then later on in their work environment. So for STI, it's really essential that the learning process normalizes mistakes and doesn't dent learners' self-confidence and self-efficacy. So let me conclude. So to fully harness innovation for progress towards the SDGs, we need a human-centered approach to STI. And going forward, we'd like to co-produce the related research agenda with a diversity of interested stakeholders. And we will talk about that in a moment in this session. Finally, I'd like to just say, if you're interested in any of these readings, there is also a literature review that this presentation has drawn on, that Jaime Echevarri has been putting together and that we would be making available for those of you who are interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothea. Both the IRMGADs in your presentation were a real tour de force across many different approaches and concepts and theories. And as IRMGAD pointed out, there are other aspects that you haven't even touched upon yet. And why are we taking all this time to go into this depth? Why talk about theories? As I said, we want to understand what's really behind much of the action that UN entities do in supporting member states on STI policy. I mean, what are the unspoken assumptions that we have here? How does our thinking work? The world is way too complex to understand without models. So that's why we go so deep. And I'm very glad to see that actually our number of participants have increased after these two rather than decreased. I was a little worried to take that time. So I think there's a demand here to see what we can learn from that. But after all, it's not just about theory. It's about seeing how it really works in practice. My point here was always, I used to have the privilege to work in a Max Planck Institute back in Germany in a research lab, and I always wonder why everyone goes to this, wants to work there, strives so hard to work in these very few places which are forefront of this. Could you not just learn this, read the articles, but as it turned out, obviously it's all this tacit knowledge, it's the connections with the other people, the human aspect that makes all the difference. It cannot just be easily transferred, not even through one individual, who may go somewhere else and another country and bring back that knowledge. They will bring back knowledge, but not all of it, because it's part of the network of these people. So I was always fascinated, but this was just introspection. And what we need here is a systematic approach. So that's why I'm very excited about these next 3 case studies. I haven't seen any things in the chat, let me say that first. So anyone who has any key questions, we can also interrupt on a comprehension question now, then put it in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we go to the next case study. I would love to take some more time to listen to those cases. So if there's none, I see no one's very quick here. So let's go ahead. Let me give the floor to Ms. Rita Alfonso. Please tell us what you learned from the favelas in Brazil.
Thank you very much. Let's share my screen. Are you seeing the slides? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. I'm Rita. I'm a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I will use some notes because a professor with a bad English and a microphone is a problem, can be a problem. And even so, we are the biggest public and free university in the country. Our community today has 80,000 people, including students, professors, and staff. We are like a city. I am a professor at the Faculty of Business and Accounting Science. And I think an important field of knowledge nowadays, because our knowledge and beliefs help the planet to get here to the global warming and the climate change. So we are part of the problem and we must be part of the solution, I think. And I think my contribution here can show some things that UFRJ does in extension activities. Extension activities is the expression we use in Brazil for outreach from the university and service to the local communities. So my own research is in social innovation, mainly with marginalized group, most of them from the favelas, but not only. Everything I studied, researched, and worked on throughout my career has been about understanding and advancing social development, social equity, and the possibility of providing opportunities for young people to make choices for their own lives. So public university education in Brazil is one of the most transformative ways of life for vulnerable populations because it allows for social mobility. I am a case. I born at very poor in the periphery of Rio de Janeiro, and now I'm a professor at a very important university in the country. We have in the university the quota system that allows half of the vacancies for public universities in the country to be offered to young people from the lower classes, and it includes Black students also. Of the total enrollment in higher education, 8 million, the majority correspond to 6 million is in the private university, but the public university are more best ranked in the country. So let me, next slide, please, Rita. So my academic interests are gated in the themes of C, social innovation, and new forms, new ways of production and consumption. So in other words, social innovation that occur to produce solutions and became product services or new ideas. And I choose to bring here extension experience, which correspond to projects carried out with the most developed technology invented by human beings, the dialogue and the joint design. Before the pandemic, we had about 2,000 extension projects only in UFRJ. Engagement in extension activities takes 10% of the workload of all our university courses. This means that all of our 53,000 undergraduate students complete 10% of their course work with extension. Only in the business course where I work, with 900 students, we have more or less 270,000 student hours involved in these activities. They are mandatory for any professor, any one of the 4,000 teachers we have in the career progression. So, what exactly is it in the university? There are three guiding principles that govern extension at UFRJ. The dialogue, interaction, the interdisciplinarity, and the interprofessionality, and the inseparable of teaching, researching, and extension. And the impacts we are pursuing is impact on student training and impact on social transformation. So we understand the dialogic interaction as an orientation and development of relationships with social sectors marked by dialogue and exchange of knowledge, replacing the discourse of academic hegemony with the idea of alliance with movement sectors and social organizations. Interdisciplinarity and interprofessionality 6, the combination of specialization and interaction of models, concepts, and methodologies, and also areas of knowledge. And the inseparable from teaching, research, and extension considers the extension action become more effective if they link it to the process of training people and generating knowledge. About the impacts, extension enable enrichment of the experience in theoretical and methodological terms, while opening space to the ethical and solidarity commitments of the Brazilian public university. The university interrelationship with other sectors of society is established with a view to transforming action focused on for the interests and needs of the majority of the population. These are two extension projects I work. I coordinate. HISE, the Support Network for Sustainable Entrepreneurship, and Mano a Mano Social Transformation Fund. It both involves professors and students from various areas of management knowledge, like finance, marketing, human resource, and etc. We offer circles of conversation and training courses, being modified at every moment. And yes, Dorothea, we make mistakes all the time. According to the dialogue, we change what is not adopted to the reality we are working. And the donation of seed capital, more or less about $500 for the participants to buy something relation with the work. So it is carried out in partnership with Ashoka Brazil. The other one that I think can be more interesting here is the Social Innovation Support Unit. Is a result of the Latin American Innovation Network. There was 12 universities in Latin America working to act as a network, but also as a support in our cities to work with with people that is out of the box. So involves professors and students from various courses and various areas of knowledge, such as engineering, administration, communication, economics, gastronomy, design, and etc. The idea is to bring the social innovators to a network formed by students and professors so that we can talk, understand their demands, and exchange experience, putting our knowledge to solve the problems they identify in their activities, and learning and research from them. The activities are conversation circles with the aim of thinking together to identify problems and thinking together to identify solutions to which group that we work with. So to finish the lessons I learned working with it, the first of all, that it work with this kind of public, need to consider the public as part of the solution, not only as a student learning something. Projects designed without them have a high chance of not working in the reality they live. We action researchers and practitioners need to be aware of our openness to change course all the time. It's hard and it's difficult, but it's necessary. We made a lot of mistakes. These changes are important for projects, and this is not our culture. The culture of management, for instance, the field I work, is to command and control, and it does not work every time. The methods, I believe, must improve and fit into that culture, like Freire said, and not the contrary. Paulo Freire, Dorothea talk about him. there is enormous power among them to solve problems as they are immersed in that culture that is marked by a collective and territorial solution to day-by-day problems. They do it all the time. The best projects in terms of acceptance and performance are the ones where all the actors involved think together in terms of how to solve it, to solve them. Their creativity ability is amazing and required in everyday life. They are entrepreneurial by nature, the spirit of soul. I don't know, without this kind of behavior, they do not survive. And my final message is that it's necessary to be sensitive to reinforce in this audience their real ability to provide solutions to the problem they face, learning a little bit about the technicians. So, can I finish? Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Rita. That was really impressive, I have to say. And I found it amazing to see all the cross linkages to the presentations by Dorothea and Irmgard before. You know, you can see the embedding in some of the theories that behind it, and for which initiatives like you also give some empirical feedback, so we can learn and make that all these initiatives much more effective and better in the future. I need to move on, but can I just ask you one question? You know, on that slide on the lessons learned, I just wonder, you know, if you had to pick just one, what is the most important one that you think any such initiative should be based?
Reinforce their ability. Because I think that if they have some problem to do with that, they live all the time without the reinforcement by the government and also by the market. So if we can reinforce, they can do it better, in my opinion.
Sounds great. Then let's hear from Tusenga. What is the situation in Zambia? Your experience, is that very similar to Rita's, or are there a lot of differences?
It's somewhat similar. So I'll go through my presentation and then we can try and draw the connections. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So as Alex introduced me earlier, my name is Tusenga Muyoya, and I'm the co-founder and research director at Asikara Network, which is a women in technology initiative that's based in Lusaka in Zambia. And some of what we do is we focus on trying to increase the interest and participation of women in technology, and we target girls who are in high school, women who are in higher education institutions, as well as those who are early in their technology careers. And we have loads of activities, but since we only have 8 minutes, I'm going to focus on talking to you about some of the things we do around training. So we teach women and girls marketable ICT skills, so things like digital literacy, coding, web development, mobile development, and more recently, data-related skills. And all of these things are in a bid to support their ability to enter into the job market, be able to create economic opportunities for themselves, and also be able to support entrepreneurship and innovation. So how our organization started was myself and my 2 co-founders. We were the only 3 women in a technical training session that was hosted by our local technology and innovation hub. And this was the slap in the face that made us really think about, why is it that we're usually the only women in these sorts of spaces? So now this is a separate conversation around the participation of women in STEM. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we're currently at about 25 to 30% of women's participation in STEM. But I'm focusing on the training, but that is also one of the main issues that is the backdrop of everything that I'm talking about. So after we had that session, we started initially just as having meetups and creating a space where women who are in situations such as ourselves could come and talk and just provide some space for us to support each other and just have conversations. And one of the main things that came out in those early meetups was a lot of the women felt that they didn't have confidence in the technical skills that they had, or they wanted to extend the technical skills that they had. And Now, it's important to note also that most of these women had already gone through some form of higher education, a college education, maybe a diploma in computing, something like that. So clearly there are major gaps in the education system in Zambia. So I'll speak a little bit about this education context. So I'm sure this is something that you're familiar with, because rote learning, it occurs in many places, not just in African institutions, but we find that also in rural schools in Europe and also in other places. But rote learning is learning which is based on memorization and repetition and recall. So we had situations where you're learning how to code, but you're told to write down a piece of code and then submit it. So you need to memorize it and write it down. Whereas something like computer programming is something that's practical. You need to code and then you need to see whether it works or not. You need to see what errors are flagged as you're coding so that you can rectify it. But that wasn't always opportunities that we had in our academic settings, even though they were computers that you could go and use for practice. But because rote learning is so pervasive, you'd still find trainers setting up this kind of learning. And then we also have penalization, which is something that Dorothea mentioned. Often we would take quizzes or write tests where if you get a wrong answer, you get points deducted. If you get a correct answer, you get 3 marks instead of 1 mark. And if you don't respond, then you get no marks. So often if you're not sure, it's safer just not to respond, which heavily discourages experimentation. And it creates this fear-based academic system that Dorothea also mentioned. And then on top of that, we have a scenario where the teacher is viewed as the only expert. So the teacher comes in and they talk and talk and talk, or you just look at their slides and you as a student are just coming to absorb, but you don't have an opinion and you don't have anything that you can contribute to the discussion. And then we have the issue of the outdated curriculum, which is fairly common, but it's a big issue when it comes to STEM subjects and technology because it's rapidly evolving. So in the end, what we have people who are unprepared for the job market after graduating, and not everybody has the fortitude and resources to go and do individual learning in order to build their portfolios that are now being requested in most job interviews. And this situation is particularly worse for women in our context because they don't have the additional time to go about doing these things, which you do in the evening, because you have work responsibilities. Okay. So at Asikana Network, we do hands-on learning as a direct way to address this and mitigate this. So all of our trainings mean that people are sitting at a computer, they're actually working through. We make sure that they're able to learn how to solve problems themselves. So they start to see themselves as having something to contribute, that they're able to try, that they're able to think through the problems instead of waiting for the person who's training. But most importantly is the fact about removing that fear as part of the learning process. So we encourage them to make mistakes and know that it's okay to make mistakes, and mistakes are part of learning, and you can't learn unless you make mistakes. And then building self-efficacy is also about them being able to see themselves as having something to say, having something to contribute, which is a foundation for any sort of innovation. Is first you need to know that, okay, I have something to bring to the table, and then you'll be able to then connect that with the things that you already know, with the things in your environment, and be able to build creative solutions, as we like to say. And also learning how to learn. Because as I mentioned earlier, we are constantly adapting and we're working in a space that's constantly changing. You need to know how to learn so that you can continue to grow. And you need to have a firm foundation in the skills that you already have so that you have the confidence to learn even new skills and to continue to add on that. And then with regards to attitudes, one of the main issues that we have found, or one of the main things that we have learned, is the importance of having mentors and role models, which is a very human-centered and human dynamic. It's a human way of looking at all this training, especially when working with women. Like, it's really important to have other women who have been where they have been, who have sat where they have sat, and who are now doing more with their careers than they were before. So we found that to be really important. Yes, so those are a lot of the things that we have learned, and all of these things enable us to have participants who come through our programs and they're able to excel and succeed where they go in the future. I'm conscious that I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to make sure that I stick within the 8 minutes. And some of the areas for future research that we would like to see, we would like to see gender just research on how this hands-on learning, how to incorporate this mentorship and this role modeling in ways that contribute to human-centered approaches to science, technology, and innovation. And I put gender just in there because, as I mentioned in those examples, even though men and women are going through the same academic system, this same funnel, there's certain issues that affect specific groups more than others. So we need to make sure that as we're doing the research, we're considering all those factors. And I would also like to see an exploration of how these things can be implemented in higher education institutions, because a lot of this is happening in informal learning institutions such as our own, but we don't see it happening in formal education institutions and in ways that you can research and you can really see what the longitudinal effect is over a long period of time. Thank you. That is my time. That's exactly 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Tusenga. That was another fantastic presentation, and congratulations to this network. It sounds fantastic. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I in the interest of time, I would just suggest we listen to Irmgard telling us what Abbott Christian from Tanzania would have liked to tell us had he not fallen sick, and then we open up for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I would just like to pass on the best greetings from Abbott Christian. He was really looking forward to this panel, and he had sent me a while ago his presentation, but unfortunately he was sick. He was traveling the last few days, and so he got sick. I think it's important to, I think we want to show you some slides because it may not be so nice to look at my presence all the time. I'm reading most of the letter or the presentation which Abbott Christian sent to me. At the beginning, he just expresses all his excitement about this invitation, and he writes that he and his community are honored for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to have a mutually enriching time with each one of you. And now here we are, and thank you for the invitation. And then he continues, talking about the first introducing the Benedictine work and pray. Those of you who are from Central Europe surely know Benedictine monks or monasteries. Of course, they're available in all continents, but their highest concentration is in Central Europe. And these monks, and I am privileged to be one of them, exists on the face of the earth since the 6th century. So Benedictines are quite an old religious order, and these monks have a motto which actually gives us their philosophy of life. The motto is ora et labora, prayer and work. So work constitutes a central element of the daily life of Benedictine monks. Then he continues to explain how this mission evolved and the work of the mission in Africa. In 1906, so it's more than 100 years, the first group of German Benedictine missionaries arrived and started a small mission in Southeast Tanzania, which grew up and became the Benedictine Abbey of Ndanda today. It was the beginning of the German colonialism in Tanzania, and that part of southern Tanzania at that time was totally underdeveloped. And the aim of the mission was to open up opportunities and new possibilities for development through Christianization. And he explains that these missionaries were basically 3 groups. There were the fathers, whose task was mostly to teach the Christian faith to the locals. Second, sisters, whose work was to provide education to girls and women, as well as healthcare to the sick. And the third group were the brothers, whose main task was work. And these brothers not only worked, they also invited young people from the region to work and to learn from them. So this was, I think I would just like to add here, these, I think many of these brothers who came from Germany and Switzerland they are not priests, they are craftspeople, and they themselves were trained in the dual apprenticeship system in Germany or Switzerland. He then continues to explain the Ndanda Vocational Training Center. The story of Ndanda Vocational Training Center is a very successful story in Tanzania. We make use of a dual system in which, by average, 1/3 of the time is used for theory in classrooms. And the remaining time, about 2/3, is used for practical learning. So the general maxim is learning by doing. Apprentices in our school enjoy this big advantage, unlike many other schools of the same nature in Tanzania. The privilege is that Ndanda is like an endless construction site, and with 3 big monasteries, around 5 schools, a huge hospital, hundreds of staff houses, and 3 dioceses, which all look for technical support. And it means that our apprentices are daily and always exposed to practical work, and that, of course, provides training opportunities. This means cars need to be fixed, buildings repaired and renovated, power needs to be fixed and installed, furniture needs to be manufactured or repaired, and so on and so forth. So this is why Ndanda, this abbey, has now a vocational training center with workshops and providing apprenticeship training in motor vehicles, mechanics, electrical installation, welding and metal fabrication, plumbing and pipe fitting, carpentry, joining, design, sewing and clothing technology, masonry and bricklaying, and secretarial services and computer application. So I must just let me say, when we at the ILO undertook a study on the informal apprenticeship system in southern Tanzania. I visited this, I was advised to visit it at Ndanda, and it is really highly impressive to see what is going on and how many young people are trained in a dual training, dual apprenticeship system. Then the presentation of Abbot Christian goes on. He talks about creativity and innovation at the Ndanda Vocational Training Center. Until 2000, the Vocational Training Center was mainly under the leadership of German brothers. In the past, however, about 20 years ago, a younger generation of African brothers with new ideas has taken charge. While still honoring the dual learning and dual apprenticeship system, the new needs and challenges demanded new answers from the technical point of view. So young people are being trained now, not for its own sake, but in order for them to get employed in companies or start up their own small businesses. And innovation and creativity is crucial in these processes. Today, unlike 20 years ago, computer programs assist in finding problems in car engines, gearboxes. New ideas are clearly visible if one look at the type of furniture produced today. Creativity and innovation is everywhere at full display. In tailoring, it's obvious that no one would buy a shirt or a dress made with 19th century mindset. Change, innovation, creativity is necessary, not only for jobs, but also for credibility and for the success, both for individuals and for the schools. I would like to add here something. It's of course, you know, the fundamental question is, how come that this dual apprenticeship system, which is always considered as a very successful training system, also in Germany, in Switzerland, in the Scandinavian countries, in Austria, why is it that this training provides, you know, is the foundation for innovation, innovative behavior, if you know, a mindset for change, looking for new ideas, constantly trying to improve. You know, dual apprenticeships means a long process of learning where theoretical and practical learning interact. And so it's part of the same process. And the trainers or experienced workers in Ndanda, the brothers, they set the standards of expertise, and they make sure by working with the apprentices and providing feedback to them that these high standards are met and learned in a process of practice. And also in apprenticeship, in this type of apprenticeship, people learn to master the trade. This means they not only have, they learn the full spectrum of all relevant skills of an occupation, not only some narrow skills on the job. So, and this gives the apprentices a strong sense of competence, self-confidence, and agency. And it's this thinking and the mindset and the competences and capabilities that enables people at work to, at the workplace to improve, adopt new technologies and solve problems. So it's about competences, but also about mindsets, about attitudes, values. And I think this is something which needs to be understood when we talk about the success of dual apprenticeship systems. Let me just finalize the letter of about Christian. He continues, we know research, development, modernization all depends on finances. We are limited in this area, but we are proud with the progress we have made. We know a long way lays ahead still. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Irmgard. Of course, you would have liked to hear Christian himself. I hope there will be other opportunities in the future to make this happen. After all, our little project in the Workstream 10 is just at the very beginning, and that's why we have this event. Those of you who've been very patiently waiting now, I'm sure some of you have some ideas. I would just suggest raise your hand. You know how to use a raise function in Zoom by now, I would imagine. If you feel too shy, you can put something in the chat to any of the speakers. Any suggestions for the project, any clarifications, anything you would like to ask? And I understand Dorothea has a slide, right? So let's see what comes in, and we can put it up to focus our discussions a little more towards getting something out for our project. Any volunteers? Everyone's too shy here. I can see.
Would you like me to just briefly talk about how far we got? I don't think we've got very far.
Let's do that then. Go ahead.
So we would really, so thank you to the participants for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed the session so far. This is really the start of a conversation about a collective research agenda in this area. So our aim is to co-produce with a variety of stakeholders a multi-pillar research agenda. And at the moment, we're really at the very beginning, but there are some pillars that we've proposed that Irmgard has already put out there. A focus, for instance, on human well-being as the goal, so also discussing the normative dimension of this, human actors in dynamic processes of STI and accelerating SDGs, and human as learners, including learning processes. These are obviously also interlinked, and there's a lot more to do when we talk also about the Leave No One Behind call of the Agenda 2030. This means that we also need to think cross-cutting issues include gender equality, the role of disability in this, and other intersectional patterns of inclusion and exclusion. So this is basically how far we got. We want to hear from you where we might also include further aspects in this agenda. And we hope to frame efforts this way and inform policy and develop knowledge this way. And then hopefully stay in touch with you. So we'll be looking at the list of delegates that or participants that we have on this, but we would also invite you to take down any of our emails and contact us if you would like to also be in touch about how this research agenda evolves over the next weeks and months and potentially years. I'm also going to put those in the chat so everyone can have those emails.
Thank you, Dorothea. So any immediate reactions? Does it make any sense? I can't even provoke you to, to say something. So let me ask a question that's burning on my mind. Now, when we look at our three fantastic cases, they all have a very strong normative elements. The human well-being there is one of the key goals and the various variations. And I think there are many more of these great initiatives that are being talked about. What difference does it make adding this element as an integral part? Because, you know, in the end, in the past, most of our knowledge, scientific knowledge, technological knowledge was not driven by a normative approach. This is, in a way, it's a new approach. Also, of course, one of great importance to the world and to, you know, all the discussions under sustainable development pillar. But let me just put this out here. Who wants to go ahead? Dorothea feels provoked. Please.
Absolutely. You want, you know, you threw that out as a provocation, and I will definitely rise to it. I think we need to recognize that, at least from where I sit in my understanding of the sciences and our academic endeavors, there is no such thing as a neutral positionality in our sciences, in our disciplines or so. It is just, and I say this as a geographer with a lot of wonderful colleagues, also in economics, management, and so on, we live in a world that is extremely econocentric in many ways. And we have to fight back for the human. We have to fight back for the non-instrumentalists, the non-metricized, the non-economic. And in a way, you know, we talked about climate change and we talked about biodiversity crisis. It's the very focus of our ways of being that is, you know, progress obsessed, metricized, materialistic, and in many ways econocentric, that has got us this way. So I'm really interested in how we can use also innovation to innovate out of this particular sort of normative box that we have managed as humanity to maneuver us into. And this is where I think the wisdom of a lot of different cultures, including several of the cultures that we may not have mentioned in our talks so far, are really important aspects of that future innovation.
Thank you so much. You almost convinced me now. I have the hands up for Tusenga and Irmgard, but I'm so happy to see someone from the chat. Christina. Can I take her first, please? You want to take the floor? I hope it works for you. Yes.
I'm mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
I'm sorry, I was too fast. Yes, it's very, very interesting. It's just a few ideas that came to my mind while listening to the speakers. The first one has to do with the point 2, basically the human beings and as actors, as decision makers. I see, yes, it is true that humans are decision makers, but I believe that artificial intelligence is now posing, I don't know, it could be some challenges. And I think it would be, as a practitioner, I would like to hear more on how the human beings can interact in the decision making with the artificial intelligence. The other element, my observation comes to the point 3, which is the human being as learner. I totally agree to the presentations of Mrs. Tusenga, as well as of the lady, sorry, I forgot the name of the lady from Brazil, and the Abbott. But all three are examples that highlights how learning occurs and what the practices can enhance learning. However, if I understood correctly, all of these experiences are in a way outside the education system. And sometimes they come in because the education system is failing to produce individuals able to learn. So it would be interesting to know and to have more research of how you can change the education system that exists, because otherwise the education system is ineffective and it is a loss of resources and opportunities. And the third element that also observation that I have, and it has to do with the human being as a learner. Often we point, or we put a lot of emphasis on problem solving, and which is very important, the ability, the innovation. But I think the education should also see how you can enhance the ability of the human being to pose questions, because that is, I think, at the base of creativity. And with that, I leave the floor to the, it's over to you.
Thank you, Christina. There was a lot to unpack here. I would imagine Tusenga and then Rita want to briefly come in. We're running out of time, but just give us the gist.
Briefly. Okay. All right. So I'll respond. I just wanted to add first to what Dorothea was saying about it being economic centric, and then I'll respond quickly to Christina's input. So the part about it being economic centric is also true in our experience as well, because when we started Asika Network, we're coders, we're programmers, we're coming from this very normative, scientific kind of background education. So that's where we started. When we first started, we were like, how can we get more people working in technology? That will be the solution to all the problems in the world. But over time, we started to discover that the technology itself doesn't actually matter, but what matters is equipping people with these skills that they can then apply to anything, because technology itself is also just a tool. And by us wanting them all to fit into that box is us applying that kind of more economic centric thinking, because it's about, oh, what can you do to enable you to get a job, to enable you to get more money? While all those things are important, now we also know this human dynamic, this human aspect, what does it mean to live a meaningful life, is also very critical. And then Christina's question, so your second observation was about hearing how human beings can interact more with AI, with the decision making in AI. And I also strongly believe, I think Dorothea alluded to this earlier, but it's not as much of a dichotomy as we often see, that human beings are on one hand and then data and AI are on the other hand. Human beings are part of the process. They're part of the process of developing those algorithms. They're part of the process of collecting the data that's fed into these systems to begin with. So that's why we're seeing, these articles about bias being introduced in AI. It's because of the human dynamic, and that can't actually be separated just yet. So I think what's important is for us to be able to develop practitioners, people who are working with data, who are able to ask these critical questions and who are able to think critically, to make sure that we are not replicating the inequalities we see in society in how we use technology and build AI. So it still falls into the panel discussion that we're having about human-centered approaches. Maybe somebody else can take the other question. Maybe Rita. So the other question was about how the things that we're doing seem to be outside of the education system. And the other one was about focusing on creativity as opposed to problem solving.
Okay, we're in principle at the end of our time, but I think we can go a little over time with the permission from the audience and the panelists. Is that okay? Yeah, because I think now we get into the discussion. So Rita,
let's add a few minutes.
Yeah, do you want to take this? other questions?
No, Rita, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, I don't have answers, but I have some comments. These principles I present here only works in my university for the extension projects. Inside university with students, these are not our rules. So I think we need, and it is urgent, an innovation on the institutions. Because we are thinking like old institutions, and we are, my university have 100 years. So how can I manage with the contemporary problems with a frame, with a mindset of the last century? So I think we must have changes in institutions. Without it, I think we cannot improve our performance on SDG included. So.
Yeah. So I have a dilemma here. So I see a new question in the chat from Elena Kuzmir. Do we want to take that first?
Yeah.
I think it relates to some of the other items that we've been mentioning. Also, the question of defining those objectives, and then there's having values and assumptions behind those. So, Elena, do you want to say them, or you just want me to read them? If I don't hear, I will just read it. We'd love to hear from you. Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Can you identify yourself and ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you. I was very impressed with all the presentations, and I would love to follow up with some of the presenters maybe at a later time. But one of the things that struck me in this particular panel was that there was also this rather rare intervention regarding the activity of the missionaries in Africa, and the role of apprenticeship, and so a kind of a different sort of angle to the notion of non-instrumentalism, human dignity, promoting the human-centric approach, but from a different angle from many of the other interventions that we are used to hearing at these types of panels. So I was just wondering to what extent this is something that is developing in a sort of multi-ideologically informed type of approach to non-instrumentalism and human centrism and human dignity. And, I don't know if I've made myself very clear in this question, and if someone could maybe address this.
No, make a lot of sense, Elena, and I mean, we took some of these examples precisely for the reason that we want to question, what are the assumptions that all of us, especially in the workstream 10 of IATT, do have in advising governments and policy positions for these UN entities. After all, these are some of the people who shape many of the policies that then are considered by member states. So what are the underlying assumptions and ideologies and theoretical beliefs from our own professions? I mean, that's part of the idea, to see where there are commonalities, where there are contextual specificities, and where some things can be generalized from. So
yes,
very well taken. Yeah. Irmgard, do you want to?
Yeah, if I just, Elena, sorry, where are you from? I mean, you're
right now I'm based in New York, so I'm in the US right now.
And you're working with a UN organization?
No, I'm representing an NGO from France, but
okay.
Here at the New York. Yes.
Yeah, I would just thank you. I would just like to mention. I mean, you see, education is a word which has very different meanings in different countries, in different cultures. And when you are just compare the German and the French education system, they are very different. And people have very different ideas of what they understand as a good education. And when you come to apprenticeship, in my country, Germany, you would always consider apprenticeship as a highly regarded form of training and learning. Not in France. There it's the training system for those who failed in the formal education system. And I think when we talk about that, it's not only talking about, Europe against Africa. It's really recognizing the country-specific, the culture, the systems which grew in a long, like Rita said, it's an institutional development process. I invited about Christian because I think this is a case which could provide many important lessons for all different projects trying to training systems trying to cope with what the UN Secretary General just said. He talked about the fact that global education is in a big crisis, and he has now took an initiative, and the UN is now preparing for a transforming education summit, which will take place in September. And we would also like, and this is also part of our one of the goals of our session, to inform about the idea that we have, when we talk about transforming education, we should really think far beyond the formal education system, because in many countries, it's not, the formal education is only one element of learning. In some countries, it's more. And so it's also to some extent a matter of who drives the debate. And if you have, researchers and academics who are driving the debate, who are coming from a country where you have a dominant formal education system, you get completely different forms of analysis, research questions, messages and lessons than when you look at countries where you have different systems. Yeah. And I think what we need to do is to recognize this diversity in education and training systems, and acknowledge all the various forms of learning. Sorry,
and I found this very refreshing that in this particular panel and the previous one that I attended, there was discussion about the diversity of learning systems and the indigenous practices that are supposed to be included in this human-centric approach. And now you also included the information about the Abbott's work in Africa. So the fact that the new angles are being included in this conversation, apart from the usual academic type of approach and the formal education, and then a discussion about institutional approaches. This to me was very refreshing, and I'm hoping this can lead to collaborations and to a creative and collaborative approach to re-establishing the human-centric angle to all this research and work.
Thank you, Elena. Let's keep in touch.
Yes, it's precisely the idea. So anyone on this call too, if you have any suggestions, ideas, case studies, theoretical concepts you're not looking at, please be in touch and share that with us. And I see in the chat also, and then Jaime put in, reminded us that we should especially look for literature from the Global South. And of course, we, it's always difficult sometimes to identify things because of language barriers, even, some more local literatures. We're very much interested to hear from you on those cases. From a UN side too, what I found personally, I was also a bit surprised by the suggestion of the example of Abbott Christian. But what I find interesting about these examples is always that there's sometimes models that can be transferred in completely different circumstances, different country, different context, different capabilities. and many others cannot. And the UN has a long tradition of having tried those at field, as have development banks and others. I mean, that's very well documented, and I think it's very important to learn from those that we've been able to transfer, and why that really is the case. And maybe one element of this is really particular aspects of the human-centered approach there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Tusenga, you have the hands up, please.
Thank you. It's just a quick one I wanted to add relating to Jaime's point about literature coming from the global south. So I just wanted to say that oftentimes there's different systems of knowledge production, yes, but oftentimes we often say, oh, we don't have much literature from the global south. Oh, well, but what we'll do is we'll try and find case studies, and then we'll write those case studies and put it in an academic form. But the people who are writing those case studies are still not the people from the global south. So there's still this kind of extraction of knowledge that's going on and converting it, formalizing it, turning it into academic knowledge, but it's still coming from these case studies. So I think maybe a provocation for this research agenda going forward is to consider looking at those structures that perpetuate these things, so that us in the global south, we're not just relegated to, okay, bring a case study. We also want to theorize, we also want to participate in this knowledge system, but we also want to elevate our different forms of knowledge making and make them valid and make them things that we can contribute to these spaces as well. So thank you, Jaime, for pointing that out.
Yeah, it is absolutely important. And I think from our own experience in the UN, I find it most interesting that if you put out a call for inputs to scientists, engineers across the world, most of the inputs are from the global south, or at least nationals from the global south, some of which are based in the north. So they're interested, they want to contribute and have some different perspectives to contribute to this debate. Yeah. So now we've gone 50 minutes over time. Any more questions? Jaime, do you want to say a few words? You also done some great background work for this initiative as in the last few weeks. Please, if you like, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Tusenga says. Yeah, that's very particular. Sometimes when you eventually find, in terms of research, a piece of research is basically some observation, some case study that comes from the eyes of a researcher that is based in an academic institution in the north. So if we could foster somehow the voices from the south to tell us how they envisage social change and learning into academic literature, into the academic world, that would also bring a fresh perspective on the topic. Because at the moment, yes, it's very particular that we have this language barrier, especially in terms of like how research is structured in databases. But even when you look and you go deeper into these databases, you find this particularity. So yeah, definitely, we should foster the voices from learning in the global south, but from the global south.
Thank you. That's very well taken, and I hope anyone in the call who wants to be in touch with us, please engage with us. We're very interested to hear from you. In this respect, I also want to really acknowledge all the contributions from our workstream 10 colleagues. Some of them I see in the call, but not that many. So, I mean, they're from UNCTAD, from ESQA, from ITU, from UNEP, from my department, DESA, from UNIDO, and some of the other regional commissions like ESQA and ECA have also contributed. UNU has contributed earlier. So I just want to acknowledge all this. Not all of them are actively involved in this little new project now yet, but I'm sure they might once they see how interesting this is. So any last words from Irmgard? You are the leading person in this.
Now, in that context, I really would like to mention also Clovis Frere from UTAT. Clovis was from the beginning involved in, give some guidance on literature reviews and give guidance on people to work with. So thank you very much. That was really very helpful. But also from UNIDO, Fernando and identified Christina, and he established the contact. Fernando Santiago, thank you so much. I would like just to say, of course, I hope that everyone in the workstream 10 would now be very excited to contribute, because that is actually the best place. You have people from 10, 12 different organizations. They all cover these various aspects of a human-centered approach, which we discuss. Not only education, but also, this whole issue of the second and the first one, because we have also important debates now on the first issue. What is human well-being? How do you measure it? And there's increasing a debate saying we don't really know how policies affect human well-being. We assume, we have many assumptions. So I think that is something which I really look forward to work with all of you, with the workstream 10, with those who listen today. Let's stay in contact. We hope that we can all organize a fantastic mission and travel to the southern part of Tanzania to visit the Danda Abbey and to visit this very interesting case of Abu Christian. I think if you ever come in this direction, go there and visit it. It's very impressive. So thank you so much. I would also like to thank Alex for taking over the function of a moderator. Well done. It was like in our living room. We enjoyed it all very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irmgard. I had to hold myself back. I would like to say so much, but okay, so there will be a follow-up to this. If you're interested in this, be in contact with us. I'm not summarizing this now. Let's just draw it to a close. Thank you everyone so much for listening in to our long talks, staying to the bitter end. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.